Hello and welcome to the 30k channel, the channel dedicated to games of Titanic battles in the Horus Heresy. I'm your host James, and I'm back with Boris for game 3 of our Siege of Rhodax escalation campaign.
Yeah.
It's been an exciting few games. I hope you've seen the last one. If you haven't, go and watch it now. It's pretty spectacular. Remember what happened? Because I sure don't.
So yeah, this is our escalation campaign. We are now up to 2,000 points, which is pretty exciting stuff.
It was 1250 last game.
1250, started at 850. So we're in the fortress world of Rhodax, which is held by the traitors, who are sitting on top of a nice, tasty warp artifact that will help them crack open the vaults of terror. The loyalists have come to try and take the fortress off them, and the traitors have come to stop them sieging the fortress. So in the start of the first two games, Noctilus, my custom legio, was sort of stalking and ambushing your custom legio, Policiates. Sort of ambush warfare, maneuver warfare, quite unusual for Titanicus. That is now over. Noctilus have been roundly defeated twice, so we're 2-0 to the Loyalists. So last game, Policiates stormed a Noctilus base. It was pretty close.
Yeah, pretty close.
Just managing to pip out the traitors and seize the base. So now Policiates have uncovered some intel. So that's where we're at in the campaign.
Yeah.
So this game is 2K, and now you're using that intel.
Yes. So this game is, as I say, it's 2,000 points each, although mine is 1,750, as we're using the Battle of Caldera Prime scenario from Titan Death, which is an interesting scenario with lots of environmental rules that we think you'll enjoy. But the basic principle is, as my Titan Legio has used that intelligence from the base, they've advanced, quickly trying to steal their way into the fortress. However, they've left their rear guard exposed, and Noctilus are coming at them to try and break the siege lines and crush them beneath the walls. So I've got a bit of a difficult one. I'm outnumbered, I'm outpointed. Well, I'm not quite outnumbered.
No.
But yes. But yeah, and there's also a warlord on the table now.
Yes, first warlord. So, as I mentioned before, the sort of maneuver warfare part of the campaign is over. It's now just straight up slogging. Noctilus have called for aid from the Warmaster, and the Warmaster responded by sending Legio Mortis, the big daddies of AT, the traitor side.
Yes.
They've come with a close-up warlord to help them face off against the equally terrifying close-up Policiates. So it's going to be a bit more of a brawler match this time, rather than me trying to run away and get out of the way. Well, I'm still going to try and get out of the way with my smaller stuff, but it'll be more of a
absolutely
face-to-face confrontation.
Our scenario state is fairly simple. You've got to kill engines essentially, but only Titans. So my knights aren't quite relevant to you, are you?
No. So as you say, we're playing the Battle of Caldera Primus mission adapted. So we're on the outskirts of the city. I'm pushing forward to try and break your siege lines and squash you between the city and the and my forces. You're trying to break through the city walls before I can stop you. So my objective is to get across the board, and yours is to...
Mine is to simply slay as much as you can, or structurally compromise it. So I'm looking for engine kills and damage, and not much else, and just surviving.
Yes.
And keeping you out of my board edge as well, denying you your objectives.
Yes, whereas the traitors side have to earn victory points by being in the Loyalist deployment zone at the end of the game and destroying Titans. Obviously, I don't get points for killing the knights, whereas you do. You have a lot of knights.
Yep.
So it's going to be an interesting game of, do I bother shooting the knights which are worth some victory points? If I leave them, they're going to get up close real fast, I think. If I kill them, that's every turn I'm shooting them. I'm not shooting things worth victory points. So it's going to be an interesting sort of balance for the traitors. We'll see if we can manage it.
Yeah, so we've seen knights on the channel before quite a lot, but today we thought we'd do something a bit different. These knights are organised into a lance, which is a new rule set in Moloch.
Yes.
So they operate as if they're in their own army list, and one unit, and it's quite interesting. We've never seen that on the channel, and you don't see that much in Adeptus Titanicus in general at the moment. So
I've never seen it in a game before, which will be really fun. Yeah,
it should be quite interesting, and I've never used one myself, so I'm quite interested to see how it works. So let's drill into our lists and get started. 1,745 points of Legio Policiates with an allied lance from House Pautasti. Stratagems taken for Legio Policiates is the 3-point offensive surge, and for the Knight Lance of House Pautasti, the 1-point vengeful stratagem from Moloch. Legio Policiates Corsair Maniple, consisting of 3 Reaver Titans. The Corsair Maniple allows them to move full distance outside of their front arcs. Legio Policiates are a custom Legio, using the rules from a White Dwarf with the Crusade Legio special rules. The rules that the Legio have taken are Armour Spikes, Ablative Carapace Armour, Motive Mastery, and the stratagem from Legio Furians originally, Offensive Surge. Leading the Corsair Maniple for Legio Policiates is the Reaver Titan Helopulus with the Princeps Sonorus in it. Helopulus is equipped with a chain fist, a melter cannon, and a turbo laser on his carapace. In addition, it has the Princeps trait Will of Iron, allowing it to shrug off catastrophic damage that could have potentially killed it. Reaver Titan Scorpius, armed with a chain fist, melter cannon, and carapace-mounted Vulcan Megabolter. Finishing off the Corsair Maniple is the Reaver Titan Ballistae Magni, armed with 2 volcano cannons and a carapace-mounted warp missile. Defending the rearguard of Legio Policiates is the Knight House of House Peltasti, consisting of 3 banners operating in a Knight Lance. Each banner is armed with a Questoris melee weapon, and one is armed with entire battle cannons, the other thermal cannons, and finally Avenger Gatling cannons. The Knight household rules in Moloch allow you to form an entire battle group of knights in a lance, which consists of 3 banners. This has both benefits and negatives. The benefits are they can share orders, they can have bonuses to coordinated strikes, so you can bring down larger engines quicker. However, it has some negatives. They must always be in coherency of 6 inches within the lance, and also they all activate at the same time in the turn, so each banner operates as one group together in the same lance. This could be a benefit or a negative in this game. We'll see how it goes. Finishing off the force for Legio Policiates and House Peltasti is a banner of Knight Lancers operating independently of the Knight Lance mentioned earlier.
2,000 points of Legio Noctilus with supporting units from Legio Mortis and House Malanax. The core part of the traitor force leading the assault is an Axiom Maniple of Legio Noctilus consisting of 2 Reavers and 2 Warhounds. Legio Noctilus is also created using the custom Legio rules from White Dwarf. Their Legio traits are Elite Magos, allowing them to add 1 to their number of servitor clades used when making repair rolls, as well as adding 2 to the result of emergency repair orders. Their second trait is Engines of War, allowing them to swap out 1 type of mandatory Titan for a Titan of their choice. Noctilus have chosen Warhounds, and in this case they have swapped out the mandatory Warlord Titan with one of the Warhounds, allowing them to field an Axiom Maniple with 2 Warhounds and 2 Reavers. Their other 2 Legio trait picks are pieces of Legio Wargear. These are blind missiles, which allow them to fire line-of-sight blocking terrain with their Apocalypse missile launchers once per game, and ranging Auspexes, which allow them to pre-measure during the game round. The Axiom Maniple allows for flexibility and allows the Legio to carry on making checks on command rolls even if one is failed. The stratagems the Legio Noctilus have chosen are Strafing Run and Auspex Bafflers. Leading the Axiom Maniple is a Princeps Sonorus in a Reaver Titan Typhoon, armed with a Volcano Cannon, a Melter Cannon, and a Carapace-mounted Turbo Laser Destructor. His Princeps trait is Swift Killer, which allows them once per round to turn 45 degrees before firing, however subtracting 1 from the hit results. Next in the Axiom Maniple is the Reaver Titan Scourge, armed with a Gatling Blaster, a Laser Blaster, and a Carapace-mounted Apocalypse missile launcher. This has been upgraded with the Legio Wargear Blind Missiles. Filling out the Axiom Maniple are 2 Warhound Titans in a squadron, Chieftain and Cavalier. One is armed with a Plasma Blast Gun and a Turbo Laser Destructor. The other is armed with a Plasma Blast Gun and a Vulcan Megabolter. Accepting Noctilus's call for aid, the War Master has sent Legio Mortis, the big guns. In support is Black Reaper, a Warlord Titan, armed with 2 Sun Fury Plasma Annihilators and a Carapace Apocalypse missile launchers. Accompanying Legio Mortis to the fortress world of Rhodax are knights from House Malanax. First is a banner of Questoris knights armed with Questoris melee weapons, a thermal cannon, a rapid-fire battle cannon, and an Avenger Gatling cannon. Finishing up the traitor forces is a banner of 3 Knight Lancers, also from House Malanax.
So we've gone through our lists and we're all deployed.
Yeah.
It's worth noting that the scenario we've picked from Titan Death, the battle for Caldera Primus, has got some interesting environmental rules. One of them, the Coming Storm, allows for weather effects that degrade. So each strategy phase we roll a dice. If it's equal to or under the round's number, the weather effects worsen, which could have an impact on our engines and the game length as well.
Yeah.
The other rule, which we've adapted slightly, is to represent off-map artillery from Nemesis Titans, one day, and other artillery strikes as the ongoing siege continues. These are going to be templates that we place, scatter, and can cause damage on engines as we move. So it's going to get very bloody very quickly.
Yes.
So in terms of objectives, the traitor's goal is?
So the traitors purely have to get across the board, and the traitors score victory points equal to scale at the end of the game, which, as you mentioned, is variable. So you've got to play for the objective here. Scale equal to the victory points equal to scale in the deployment zone, as well as Titans killed, but not Knights. Crucially, as we mentioned before, so to the traitor, the Knights are worth nothing. However, they're really deadly. It's an entire lance of Knights. If they get into contact, it's going to be really deadly. So I'm going to have to choose what I fire at. The Loyalists, however, score victory points for both Knights and Titans destroyed. So for you, it's basically wipe the traitor off the board and keep them away from your board edge. Whereas for me, the traitors have got to do a lot of decision making quite early on. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully it'll go all right.
Yeah, well, it's going to be a bloody game.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yes.
And you've picked first player, is that right?
Yes, the traitor player picks first. Who goes first in this first round in this mission? I have chosen for the Loyalist to go first, to bring you a bit closer to me to start with. So there's no roll off.
Okay, so first turn Legio Policiates. Good luck.
Good luck.
Turn 1 strategy phase. Legio Policiates stratagems. No stratagems to play, but we rolled for weather effects. Nothing happened for weather just yet. However, the artillery scattered wide just south of Legio Noctilus's lines.
Turn 1 strategy phase for Legio Noctilus, calling in their strafing run, targeting the banners of Knights. Every single banner of Knight was hit. However, a good combination of low number of hits and excellent Iron Shield saves meant no damage was caused to any Knight.
Turn 1 orders phase for Legio Policiates. The Reaver Titan Ballistae Magni failed its command roll for first fire order, which means that there's going to be no orders for Legio Policiates in the first turn of the game, which could damage their prospects in this crucial first stage.
Turn 1 strategy phase, Legio Noctilus. Almost no orders, only one order issued this turn. Choosing not to give orders to a lot of the Titans to just keep them flexible. Worried about having the wave of Knights come towards us. It would have been a bad idea to potentially issue movement orders, and potentially also a bad idea to give them things like first fire or split fire and then leave them in position where they could be outflanked. The only order that was issued was to the Warlord Black Reaper, which was issued a split fire order so it can target things independently.
Turn 1 movement phase for Legio Policiates. Sounding the clarion call of the advance, the entire Knight Lance of House Peltasi advances towards the line of Noctilus, hoping to delay them as they advance on the rear guard.
Turn 1 movement phase for Legio Noctilus. First activation is the Reaver Titan Scourge pushes forward slightly just to try and bring its arc to bear on the rapidly encroaching lance of Knights. Hopefully we'll get some decent shots off later in the combat phase.
Turn 1 movement activation for Legio Policiates. The banner of Cerastus Knights from House Peltasti have advanced on the flank towards the Mortis Warlord.
Next activation for Legio Noctilus. The Questoris banner from House Malanax moved in front of the Reaver Titan that's just moved Scourge to act as a screen against the incoming enemy Knights. They might not be long for this world, but hopefully they will act as a little bit of a speed bump.
Next activation for the Legio Policiates. The Reaver Titan Scorpius advances beyond the rear guard to attempt to bring the fight to close quarters with the advancing traitor forces.
Legio Noctilus next activation. The Warhound Squadron on the right flank advanced their regular 8 inches, turning slightly to try and bring the enemy units into arc, threatening that right flank, but they're not being greedy and pushing reactive right now. They'll try potentially to run up that flank later in the game.
Next activation for Legio Policiates, the Princeps Honorius in Heliopolis pushes its reactor, gaining a point of heat to advance on the advancing traitors.
Legio Noctilus next activation, the Princeps Honorius and the Reaver Titan Typhoon pushes forward, not pushing its reactor to gain extra movement, as we're still quite cagey about the oncoming enemy, trying to hedge our bets slightly.
Final activation for Legio Policiates, the Reaver Titan Ballistae Magni sidesteps to get good arc on the advancing Knights of House Malanex beneath the Reaver Titan.
Final movement activation for Legio Noctilus. The Knight Lancers from House Malanex have stayed cautious, just tucking themselves behind the terrain, but still giving themselves plenty of options for next turn in terms of charge orders and targets, but just trying to keep their heads down while there's a lot of big guns firing this turn.
Damage control phase for the first turn of the game. No damage was dealt by either side in the opening phases. As such, there is only 1 point of reactor heat vented by Heliopolis this turn. Turn 1 combat activation. First activation to Legio Policiates. The Reaver Titan Scorpius opens fire with its Carapace Volgan Megabolter, but overestimates the distance, with each of the shots scattering harmlessly in front of the enemy Reaver it was targeting. It then opens fire with its Melter Cannon, which scatters, hitting harmlessly into the distance.
First activation for Legio Noctilus, the Questoris Knight Banner from House Malanax activated. Fearing they might not be long for this world, I wanted to use them before they died. They targeted the enemy Questoris Knight Banner on the other side of this rock. Their battle cannon did no damage, missing the shots. However, their thermal cannon hit once and managed to do a devastating hit, so we started on the way to working these Knight Banners down.
Next activation for Legio Policiates. The entire lance of House Peltasti opened fire at the single banner of Questoris Knights of House Malanex. The first banner, armed with battle cannons, did a single point of direct damage. The second banner, armed with thermal cannons, did a point of devastating damage, which was a lot better. And the final banner, armed with Avenger Gatling cannons and rolling a frankly ridiculous 32 dice, did absolutely nothing to the banner.
Legio Noctilus next activation, the Warhound Squadron on the right-hand flank, both fired, targeting the Knight Banner with the battle cannons. Mostly the Plasma Blast guns did good work and managed to do enough damage to take 2 Knights off the banner, reducing them to half strength.
Next activation for Legio Policiates, the Reaver Titan Ballistae Magni, pushing its reactor to fire both its volcano cannons, taking 2 points of heat in the process. However, it was a good result, as it absolutely obliterated the rival banner of House Malanex, which now are just a smouldering wreck on the battlefield.
Next activation for Legio Noctilus, the Princeps Honorius in Scourge targeted the Knight Banner with thermal cannons. Firing with the turbo laser on the carapace did a devastating hit. The melter cannon unfortunately scattered into nowhere. The volcano cannon then targeted, gained 2 points of heat unfortunately, and it still scattered, but luckily still onto the banner. It did 2 hits and enough to kill 1 knight and damage another.
Next activation for Legio Policiates, the Reaver Titan Heliopolis opens up with its Carapace turbo laser on the Legio Mortis Warlord. Pushing its reactor for Shield Bane, it awakens the Machine Spirit, but the Princeps Honorius keeps it at bay. It's enroaching fire, then hits the Warlord, forcing it to push its reactor, stripping a single shield, and forcing it to take some heat as well.
Next activation for Legio Noctilus, the Warlord from Mortis uses its split fire to target 3 different enemy units. It's a pretty great effect. Its first shots are with the Carapace-mounted missile launchers, targets the enemy Reaver, managing to do 2 levels of shield damage after the shots had rung out. 1 Plasma Executioner then targets the enemy Knight Lancers, doing a devastating hit, gaining a point of heat with maximal fire, unfortunately. However, the other Plasma Gun fires at the enemy Questoris with the Avenger Gatling cannons. No heat from the maximal fire, however, only doing a direct hit. But it manages to put damage across the board, which is what we need to do.
Final activations for turn 1 combat phase. Both units of Thrastus Knights, Traitor and Loyalist alike, are out of range for their combat activations, and as such, they have not much to do this phase. Moving on to the end phase, nothing to resolve, but that's been a pretty dramatic and pretty sketchy first turn, with damage across the board, and next turn is going to be even bloodier for both players. So we'll move into turn 2 and see who has priority for that.
Turn 2, strategy phase, Legion Noctilus priority. The traitors won the roll-off and decided to go first, as it's probably quite a key stage. In the stratagem step, Noctilus called in their fighter bombers in the strafing run stratagem, targeting 2 enemy Knight Banners and 2 enemy Reavers, managing to do 1 shield damage to each Reaver and do a single direct hit to the thermal cannon Knight Banner. Then we rolled for the incoming artillery barrage that happens every turn as part of the ongoing effect. This time it hit towards the edge of Policiate's deployment zone. It scattered into the enemy Knight Banners with the battle cannons and again did a single point of damage. We also rolled for the incoming storm as it's coming in and the weather's closing in. We rolled under the turn with a 1, being turn 2. So the weather has moved up 1 table. It's now getting darker, and every weapon range is now reduced by 6 inches unless the range is already under 6 inches. So it's going to be a lot harder to target the enemy knights as they get closer, which could be worrying.
Turn 1 strategy phase for Legio Policiates, priority to Noctilus. The Reaver Titan Heliopolis passes its order for full stride to advance towards the traitor lines. The second Reaver, Scorpius, fails its full stride, but in hindsight that's not the worst choice, as it means the rest of the force has got some flexibility.
Legio Noctilus orders in the stratagems phase. We started with the Princeps Senuris in Typhoon, passed a split fire order just to give himself some flexibility in what to target, and moving straight forwards isn't too bad of a negative at the moment. The Mortis Warlord then also managed to pass a split fire order only just, again giving himself a lot of flexibility in what to target depending on what comes towards him. This is going to be a turn of moves and counter bluffs, so quite lucky that we've managed to keep a flexibility, and we'll see what happens. Turn 1, first activation for Legio Noctilus in the movement phase. The Princeps Senuris in Typhoon has moved slightly forwards a few inches within his front arc, just deadly aware that there is a large mob of Questoris just over the ridge. Doesn't want to get too close and taken out of the battle this early.
Turn 2 movement phase, activation for Legio Policiates. House Pautastes, Knight Lance, activates as a whole, advancing on Noctilus further. The first 2 banners advance towards the Reavers, and the banner with the battle cannons that's under strength has just advanced right into the Warhounds to threaten them and potentially force them to move out of threat range.
Next movement activation for Legio Noctilus, the Reaver Titan Scourge has sidestepped 3 inches just to bring its guns to bear on the rapidly encroaching enemy knights. Doesn't want to get any closer, which is a great play by Policiates because Noctilus really want to be getting up the board soon. However, we've brought our guns to bear, hopefully being able to do some damage later on.
Next activation for Legio Policiates. The Cerastus banner of House Pautasti advances towards the Warlord, trying to keep as far to its arc as possible.
Next activation for Legio Noctilus, the Warhound Squadron Scarpered, not wanting to be anywhere near the Knights in the combat phase. They both push their reactor for extra movement, both gaining 1 point of heat. The rear Warhound also pushed its reactor for extra turns. Machine Spirit checked, but fortunately passed, however, is now in the orange on the reactor. However, they are both now out of the way and facing towards the Knights. Hopefully they can avoid being charged and having themselves meleeed to death this turn.
Next activation for Legio Policiates. The Reaver Titan Scorpius advances on the Warhounds that have been slightly cornered by the Knight Lance of House Pautasti.
Next activation for Legio Noctilus, the Knight Lancer banner from House Malanax has charged to the aid of the Warlord, trying to intercept the enemy Knight Lancers and forming sort of a shield screen. We'll see if it pays off.
Next activation for Legio Policiates. The Reaver Titan Ballistae Magni turns and advances forward in order to bring its guns to bear on the Cerastus Knights that have just revealed themselves.
Final activation for Legio Noctilus, the Warlord Black Reaper from Legio Mortis spent his turn, reversed ever so slightly an inch, and then rotated slightly just to make sure guns are in range and in arc for the maximum number of targets.
Under full stride orders, the Reaver Titan Heliopolis advances towards the Legio Mortis Warlord. Pushing its reactor to get extra movement, it takes 2 points of heat, pushing its reactor into the yellow.
Turn 2 damage control phase, Legio Noctilus priority. Started with the Warlord from Legio Mortis. Managed to roll enough to repair its shields and voids back to full strength. Both Reavers of Legio Noctilus also managed to vent plasma and keep their shields in the green, which was great. The Warhound Squadron, however, the first Warhound managed to repair itself back to green. The second one was in orange from boosted movement, took a strength 9 hit to the chest, to the body, managed to take a crit, which then caused a reactor leak. It then, however, rolled enough to repair the crit it just took, but it is still damaged on the body location, which isn't great, but could be a lot worse from being in the orange.
Legio Policiates, damage control phase. The two Reavers, Scorpius and Ballistae Magni, rolled really well in the damage control phase, both of them restoring their shields and reactors to green in this phase. The Princeps Sonorus, who pushed his reactor for 2 points earlier in the round, was not so lucky, still managing to restore a single point of shield, but its reactor is still in the yellow for the coming turn.
Turn 2 combat phase, first activation for Legio Noctilus. The Warlord Black Reaper from Legio Mortis uses its split fire to target 2 different targets. First, it fires its Apocalypse missile launchers at the enemy Reaver charging towards their lines with the Princeps Sonorus. 10 shots, only 4 hit, which is really unfortunate, but still managed to strip 2 void shields, which is really lucky, bringing it down to 1 remaining. It then fired every single plasma gun shot on maximal fire at the enemy Knight Lancers, all 8 shots, luckily only scoring 1 point of heat, still in the green. 6 hits went through and managed to cause enough damage to destroy Knight and bring the final one down to 1 structure point remaining. Not too bad, it feels a little safer there, but next turn it's going to have a Reaver in its face, so we'll see what happens.
Next activation for Legio Policiates. The Reaver Titan Ballistae Magni opens fire with its volcano cannons on the Cerastus Knights of House Malanex. The first volcano cannon pushes its reactor, taking a point of heat and awakening the machine spirit, which is just about suppressed. That does a devastating hit to the banner. The second volcano cannon, which forces it to take another 2 points of heat, meaning its reactor's in the yellow again. However, this did a devastating and a critical, just meaning that 2 knights were lost to House Malanex. Pretty successful, but at a cost of reactor heat.
Next activation for Legio Noctilus. The lone Cerastus Knight then activates against its opponent. Close range, luckily just within 2 inches. It fired its Iron Shield Blast first, neither shot doing any damage. It then struck with its lance, 2 hits, rolled a 1 and a 2, really unfortunately. However, the 2 was just enough to do a single direct hit, which is all that was needed to kill the enemy Lancer. So it's just about managed to destroy the enemy Lance group, but is on its own and looking a bit lonely.
Combat activation for Legio Policiates. The Reaver Titan Scorpius opens fire with its Carapace Vulcan Megabolter on the Squadron of Warhounds. It does a massive 7 hits thanks to the Vulcan Megabolter's rapid trait. However, owing to some good luck and a pushed reactor, which does cost a point of heat, no shields were lost. The next attack was the Melter Cannon, which hit, and again, both shield saves were passed.
Next activation for Legio Noctilus, the Reaver Titan Typhoon targets the enemy Knight banner directly in front of it. The Carapace weapon inflicts a single direct hit. That's about where the luck ran out. The Melter Cannon scattered. It did scatter backwards into the Reaver Titan of Policiates, doing a single shield damage. The Volcano Cannon then caused a point of reactor heat and then missed completely and scattered into nowhere. So a single direct hit and 1 void shield from all that firing.
Final activation for Legio Policiates. Activating the Knight Lance as a whole, the banner with the battle cannons opens fire on the Reaver Titan, hitting it. However, it saves all of its shields. The remainder of the Lance aren't able to hit. The ones with Avenger Gatling cannons cannot hit as their strength is not high enough. And the ones with thermal lances can't hit either, as due to the weather rules, they're not in range.
Next activation for Legio Noctilus, the Reaver Titan Scourge targeted the Knight banner armed with Avenger Gatling cannons right in front of him. Every single shot rang out, and the grand total was a single direct hit to the banner. Their Iron Shield saves proving really effective at shrugging off damage, which is quite worrying.
Final activation for Legio Policiates. The Reaver Titan Heliopolis advances under full stride, pushing its reactor and taking a point of heat, but luckily keeping the awakened machine spirit at bay. It's hoping to threaten the Mortis Warlord, but it is far away from that rear guard, potentially leaving an opening in later turns.
Final activation of turn 2 in the combat phase. The Warhound Squadron targeted individually 2 different Knight banners. The first Warhound targeted the banner with thermal cannons, managing to kill 1 with a little bit of bad luck. It didn't do any more damage, but we'll take having downed 1 Knight. The second Warhound targeted the squadron with battle cannons that was threatening the side of the Reaver. It managed to pick up its luck and kill both, wiping the banner off the table, leaving us a little bit more secure for next turn. Turn 2 end phase. No ongoing effects or criticals to resolve, so it's just in turn 3. Could be a really crucial turn with Noctilus really needing to push up the board to actually get to their objective. They've only killed Knights so far, which are worth no victory points. So we've managed to kill quite a few Knights, which is great, less threatening. However, Policiates are threatening our rear lines with their Reavers and are pushing forward to threaten our flanks with their Reavers. They have, however, abandoned their deployment zone, so it's a bit of a gamble. We'll see if it works out for them.
Turn 3 stratagem phase, priority to Legio Policiates. No stratagems were enacted by Legio Policiates. However, Noctilus enacted the strafing run stratagem, which caused no damage to either side. In addition, we rolled for the weather effects, and no additional effects were rolled, meaning we're still at -6 for range, and the artillery strike special rule scattered just short of the Warhounds on the flank there. Turn 3 strategy phase orders. For Legio Policiates, the Reaver Titan Scorpius passed a charge roll, meaning it can potentially threaten the Warhounds on the flank. However, unluckily, the Princeps Sonorus and Heliopolis has bottled it in the last minute, failing a command check on a 1, which is really unlucky, considering with Motive Mastery it would need anything more than a 2 to succeed. Taking advantage of its hesitation, the Cerastus Knight of House Malanex passes a charge roll, meaning it's definitely going to threaten the Reaver Titan in the coming phase. Turn 3 activation in the movement phase for Legio Policiates. The Reaver Titan Ballistae Magni turns slightly to bring its guns to bear on the Warhound Titans on the flank.
Turn 3 first activation for Legio Noctilus in the movement phase. The Warhound Squadron on the flank has moved up, not pushing its reactor because both are dangerous near the orange. Moved just straight down the side of the board, entering the objective zone, which is great. However, they are dangerously close to the enemy Reaver Titan with a chain fist with a charge order, hoping we aren't in range. However, the enemy Reaver with the twin volcano cannons is also staring right at them, so they might be in for a bit of hurt this turn.
Next activation for Legio Policiates. The Reaver Titan Scorpius charges into the Warhound Titans on the flank. With its momentum, it manages to roll 5 dice with its chain fist, which severely damages the already damaged body of the Warhound Titan, leaving it on the final stage of the damage track and with 2 criticals.
Next activation for Legio Noctilus. The lone Knight Lancer from House Malanax undertook its charge order and went straight into the front of the enemy Princeps Sonorus in the Reaver. Its shock lance struck out, targeted the body as the weakest part of the Reaver. 2 hits and 1 damage went through, did a single devastating hit. Not great, but it can act hopefully as a speed bump for the next turn, keeping the Warlord away from the enemy chain fist.
Adapting a very peculiar form of manoeuvring, Reaver Titan Heliopolis turns and then sidesteps 6 inches, moving away from the Cerastus Knight and towards the Warlord and taking advantage of the Corsair Maniple trait.
Next activation for Legio Noctilus. The Warlord Black Reaper from Legio Mortis senses he's now in somewhat of a duel with the enemy Princeps Sonorus, turns and sidesteps to bring his guns to bear directly ahead. It's slightly worrying that his opponent has a melee weapon, but hopefully between the Knight Lancer and his Sun Fury plasma guns, he could do some damage to it.
Next and final activation for Legio Policiates, the Knight Lance of House Peltasti activates and moves towards both Reavers, hoping to threaten both of them in the coming phases.
Final 2 activations. The 2 Reaver Titans of Legio Noctilus have pushed their reactors to gain extra turns to bring themselves out of range of the Knights threatening them, and turn to bring their guns to bear, hopefully able to put some damage down on them for coming so close. We're hopefully out of minimum range for melee as well, but we'll see in the coming turns.
Turn 3 damage control phase. The Reaver Titan Scorpius, rolling 2 1s and a 2, did absolutely nothing and has not repaired any of the damage to its shields or plasma reactor. The next Reaver, Ballistae Magni, manages to restore 2 points of heat to its plasma, venting it, which is important given its volcano cannon loadout. Finally, the Princeps Sonorus, in range of the Warlord, only managed to restore a single reactor, which isn't ideal, as it needs its shields to full in its coming duel with the Warlord.
Damage control phase, turn 3 for Legio Noctilus. The Warlord Titan from Legio Mortis vented the single point of plasma that it needed to and is back to green. The Princeps Sonorus in Typhoon rolled quite badly, only restoring 1 point of plasma when it needed to restore quite a few as it needs to use its volcano cannon. It's still in the yellow, unfortunately. The Reaver Titan Typhoon pushed its reactor and shields back to green. It's sitting happy. Crucially, the Warhound Squadron, the Warhound who'd taken critical damage managed to repair 1 crit, so he's only on level 1 of his crit on his body. However, he's still facing down the enemy Reaver with a chain fist, so it might be academic.
First activation for Legio Policiates. The Reaver Titan Scorpius, engaging the Warhound it had previously charged, suffered a bit of bad luck. Rolling a bad set of rolls, including a 1 for its melee weapon, it only managed to get it back to the final stage of the crit track. Its melter cannon hit, striking the leg and only scoring some crits on the legs. Not quite enough for an engine kill, unfortunately.
First activation for Legio Noctilus in the combat phase. The Warhound Squadron activated to make sure they actually get to fire before one of them, or potentially both of them, die quickly. The Warhound that is crippled fired back at its attacker with the chain fist. It managed to score 2 points of damage to the leg and 2 points of damage to the body. Not great, but not too bad. The second Warhound was only an arc, but so fired at the enemy Reaver on the hill with the 2 volcano cannons. It fired Shield Bane and Plasma Blast Gun, however the enemy made all their Void Shield saves, so no damage.
Next activation for Legio Policiates. The Reaver Titan, Ballistae Magni, unleashes its warp missile on its rack at the already crippled Warhound Titan. However, this rare weapon from the age of technology scattered off harmlessly into the distance, possibly obliterating a settlement elsewhere.
Next activation for Legio Noctilus. The lone Knight Lancer fired a blast from its iron shield at the enemy Reaver Titan in front of the Warlord, attempting to bring down its last shield to open it up to the full fury of the Warlord's firepower. Unfortunately, both shots missed.
Next activation for Legio Policiates. The Princeps Sonorus in Helopolis opens fire on the Warlord, firing with a turbo laser and pushing it for shield bane, takes a single point of reactor heat and only removes a point of shield from the Warlord Titan. It then fires its melter cannon at the enemy engine and misses.
Next activation for Legio Noctilus. The Reaver Titan Typhoon opens up on the Knight Banner directly in front of it, firing the melter cannon and the volcano cannon, gaining 1 point of heat. Both hit and both blasts killed 1 knight, so reducing the banner down to 2. The carapace weapon was too close to fire, however.
Final combat activation for Legio Policiates. The Knight Lance of House Peltasti opened fire with its thermal cannons on the Reaver. Both shots, however, missed, and the 2 with Gatling cannons cannot damage the shields of the Reaver closest to it.
Next activation for Legio Noctilus. The Reaver Titan Scourge targeted the Knight Banner directly in front of it. Using the Gatling Blaster and the Turbo Laser, it managed to do enough damage to kill 1 Knight and bring the second one down to its last structure point, unfortunately leaving it still standing. Final activation for Legio Noctilus. The Warlord Black Reaper targets the enemy Reaver directly in front of it. Got some really lucky rolls in the Ardex Defensor Grid, rolling 3 hits and causing the enemy Void Shields to finally collapse, leaving it fully exposed. We tried then to target the body that was already damaged with the first Sun Fury. Combination of bad rolls to hit and to damage led to only a single direct hit to the body. We then targeted the enemy Chain Fist so it wouldn't be able to be used next turn. However, every single shot missed, which was really unfortunate, leaving the enemy Reaver threatening and dangerous if wounded. Turn 3 end phase. The critically damaged Warhound on the left flank suffered a reactor leak, advancing its reactor by 2 back into the orange, really unfortunately. Even worse, it suffered a void shield generator burnout, so it is now voidless and back in the orange, with crits to its body and damage to its legs, so it's really struggling. Across the board, there wasn't anything else in the orange, and no lasting ongoing effects, so we go to the priority roll-off for turn 4, which again could be really, really critical.
Turn 4 strategy phase, priority to Legio Policiates. In the stratagem phase, Policiates enacted the vengeful stratagem on the lone knight with a thermal lance, meaning it's going to charge in a last desperate act of glory the enemy Reaver. Potentially might do some damage, or it might die ignobly on the battlefield. Also roll this turn with the weather effects, which have increased by 1, meaning we're now suffering from acid rain, which will degrade our shields and cause damage to any titans without shields. Additionally, the artillery bombardment was rolled and scattered harmlessly into the distance. In the orders part of this phase, Policiates enacted 4 charge orders on the Reaver Titan Heliopolis, the Reaver Titan Scorpius, and both Knight Banners, one of them due to the vengeful stratagem mentioned earlier.
Turn 4 strategy phase for Legio Noctilus, calling in the strafing run against targeting 2 enemy Reavers, managed to do a single point of damage to Heliopolis, whose shields are down, to the head, which isn't too bad. Orders-wise, managed to pass almost every single order issued. Both Reavers have issued a split fire to allow their carapace weapons to fire at things that aren't the Knights, as they can't fire at them because they're so close. The Warlord Titan issued a first fire just to see if it can get some damage off even after it's charged potentially. The 2 Warhounds, the damaged Warhound has issued an emergency repair roll and amazingly rolled 2 6s for the critical damage, taking it back to only 1 level of critical damage. It's really sticking around. The other Warhound that's undamaged has issued a full stride order just to try and get away from the threatening enemy Reaver Titans. It's going to be a really interesting turn for orders and for movement, and we'll see what happens.
First activation for Legio Policiates in the movement phase is the Knight Lance of House Peltasti. Because of the acid rain that's now in effect, they both suffered a Strength 8 hit, which was not deflected by the Iron Shields and caused a single direct hit to the banner in combat with the Reaver. They then managed to do 2 direct hits to the body of the Reaver, not too bad at all. Finally, the lone remaining member of the final banner charged the Reaver Titan, dealing a devastating hit before dying in the ensuing combat. Brave, brave knight indeed.
First activation for Legio Noctilus in turn 4 of the movement phase. Move the Cerastus Knight Lancer just directly in front of the enemy Reaver. It's almost certain to die as the enemy Reaver has a charge order. However, this will hopefully block them from charging the Warlord, which can then fire. It was a really difficult choice between this and moving the Warhound Squadron out of the way of the other enemy Reaver, which also has a charge order. However, after some thinking, it was pretty obvious I couldn't get the Warhounds out of the way, and probably was going to get charged either way due to the maneuverability of the Corsair Maniple. However, hopefully this has meant the Warlord will stay undamaged for at least 1 more turn. We'll see what happens.
Next activation for Legio Policiates. The Reaver Titan Scorpius takes a hit to its shields and loses 1 due to the acid rain, but then engages the already wounded Warhound Titan. Targeting the body, it deals enough damage to destroy the engine, which explodes in a massive explosion, rolling a 10 on the damage chart. This then results in a colossal roll of a 6 on both engines to the Warhound, 6 to the body, which puts it to the end of the damage track and into crit, and for Scorpius itself, disables the Chain Fist. Pretty explosive end.
Next activation for Legio Noctilus in the movement phase. The Warlord triggers its first fire, targeting the enemy Reaver directly ahead with no shields. Makes a targeted shot at its body. 4 shots go in. It does fire maximal and raise its reactor by 1, putting it in the orange, which isn't great. It's going to take some damage in the damage control phase. However, 2 of the hits go through as criticals, putting the enemy Reaver on 2 criticals on its body, which isn't too bad. Hopefully we can do more damage later in the turn.
Next activation for Legio Policiates in the movement phase. The Reaver Titan Ballistae Magni rotates to face the already damaged Warhound Titan on the flank.
Next activation for Legio Noctilus, the Reaver Titan Scourge moves in its front arc due to the split fire order, but manages to move up, giving it some options in the coming combat phase on what it wants to target.
Final activation for Legio Policiates in the movement phase. The Reaver Titan Heliopolis, managing to avoid any damage from the acid rain to its head this turn, was forced to charge the Cerastus Knight, which so bravely intercepted the Reaver's charge against the Warlord. While it was easy to dispatch the small knight, however, it is now exposed to a fully shielded and operational Warlord Titan opposite itself, which is concerning as Heliopolis has no shields and has a very damaged body.
Last activation is the movement phase for Legio Noctilus. The Princeps Sonuris in Typhoon sidestepped a few inches, pushing his reactor to go a little bit more to get out of the way of the enemy knights. Not taking any damage from the acid rain. Not ideal as he wants to be moving up board, but the knights really force his hand, which is really great play. The last activation was the last Warhound, who took a shield point, lost a point of void shields from the acid rain, and has scurried up the hill to try and hide, get behind some cover away from those volcano cannons. Hopefully, at least, he can survive another turn or two. He is on a full stride, so hopefully he can move. He'll be able to move later again in the turn.
Turn 4, damage control phase for Legio Policiates. The Reaver Titan Scorpius manages to vent its reactor back to green. Pretty successful. In addition, as no rolls were made for Ballistae Magnus on the hill, finally, the Reaver Titan Heliopolis, in a feat of mad engineering by its Magos, manages to restore its void shield, potentially saving it from obliteration from the Warlord Titan in front.
Turn 4 damage control for Legio Noctilus. Starting with the Warhound, he vented a single point of plasma. Unfortunately, couldn't repair the crit on his body, so he's still got a reactor leak. The Reaver Titan Scourge vented 1 point of plasma and is sitting quite happily. The Reaver Titan Typhoon with the Princeps Sonuris, really unfortunately, has a reactor leak. Rolled a void shield collapse, so his voids went from absolute full to collapsed, and then managed to only vent plasma. So he's back in the almost green, which is good for his volcano cannon, but he leaves him really exposed, which is unfortunate. Finally, the Warlord from Legio Mortis also had a reactor leak, took a strength 9 hit to the body, but luckily it only resulted in a single direct hit. He then managed to vent his plasma back to the yellow and is looking a lot better.
Combat phase, turn 4, first activation to Legio Policiates. The Reaver Titan Scorpius opens fire with its carapace-mounted Vulcan Megabolter at the Warhound that had just scurried away from it, forcing it to push its reactor and taking 2 heat, going back into the orange after it had just cooled its reactor down. However, it only lost 1 void shield, which isn't a great result, but still not bad.
First activation in the combat phase for Legio Noctilus, the Reaver Titan Typhoon targeted the Knight Banner directly in front of it with the Melter Cannon. Luckily it hit, did a crit and removed 1 Knight, so only leaving 1 left. Then used a split fire order to do something slightly tricksy and fire its turbo laser directly behind it at the enemy Knight, the Reaver that just regained shields. It put Shield Bane on its weapon, luckily getting no heat. Firing twice, hitting once, but unfortunately the enemy saved it, so no damage to the shields, but a good try.
Next combat activation for Legio Policiates. The Reaver Titan Heliopolis activates, taking a point of shield damage due to the acid rain. It then opens fire with its carapace turbo laser, pushing it for Shield Bane to strip some of the shields. However, the impetuous rage of its Princeps Sonuris means that it took 2 points of heat to the reactor, pushing it into the red and very dangerous territory. However, it did strip a single point of shield. It then fired with the Melter Cannon, which hit, doing 2 hits to the Warlord's shields, which managed to take it down by 1 and forces it to push its reactor back into the orange. Not bad, but I'm running in red at the moment, so dangerous.
Next activation for Legio Noctilus in the combat phase, the Warhound activates its full stride order, peeling out from behind cover to run around the side of the enemy Reavers, bringing it to face potentially for next turn to get some side shots, hopefully also just bringing itself really far away from the enemy Reaver. It pushed for extra movement, but luckily kept its reactor cool. Next activation for Legio Noctilus, the Reaver Titan Scourge activated. Using a Spitfire order, it fired the Barrage trait on the Apocalypse, targeting the enemy Princeps Signoris, trying to strip its last shields away. Unfortunately, every shot missed, which was really unfortunate, but there we go. It used its Gatling Blaster and its Laser Blaster, targeting the enemy Reaver, which has killed the Warhound earlier. It managed to drop its shields all the way to the last shield, which is really good. So hopefully next turn we can start doing some damage to it. Final activation for Legio Noctilus. The Warlord Black Reaper targets its dueling foe, the enemy Reaver Titan Helopolis. Using one Sun Fury Executioner to drop its shields, it then takes a targeted shot into the body, dropping the Reaver Titan down to its final critical and killing it. However, renowned for its stubbornness, the enemy Reaver Titan has a Warlord trait, which means we both roll on the catastrophic damage table. If the Policiates player rolls higher than the Noctilus roll, it shrugs off the catastrophic damage and is alive for another turn. This could be really bad, as it will stay alive for next turn. Even with a red reactor, it will possibly be able to get a charge off. So this is a really key roll. So let's see what we roll. So I'll roll first. So Noctilus rolls 10. Oh my gosh. Okay, so a 10. A 10 and your Reaver survives.
No.
There's a 2.
No.
Oh my gosh.
Kill.
So that's really that's a big relief for me, as last game this happened. And the Reaver shrugged off. However, this time, clearly a Sun Fury to the chest was a bit too much to handle. We'll calculate the damage and come back to you. Having rolled a catastrophic damage, 10 on the damage table, the Reaver Titan Helopolis explodes with its reactor in the red. It's a titanic explosion in every sense of the word. It clips both the Reaver Titan Typhoon and the Warlord Titan Black Reaper. The Reaver Titan Typhoon gets off relatively lightly, with its volcano cannon taking the brunt of the blast and being disabled. The Warlord, however, takes hits to the legs. It takes 6 hits, taking it to the first track on the critical, all the way from no damage. So its legs are quite damaged now. However, we did manage to drop the enemy Princeps Signoris. Hopefully it was a good trade. We've got to see what will happen in the following turns.
Turn 5 strategy phase. The battle outside the fortress has really begun to escalate, with both sides launching indiscriminate bombardments that hit both sides as they fight outside the fortress. As such, following the rules of the scenario, we've scattered 6 markers around that represent chemical bombardments from indiscriminate artillery off-map. Each one of these markers blocks line of sight, and to any models that were hit, has dealt damage as if it was acid rain. To this extent, we've taken some damage from some Titans, and also, crucially, the Reaver Titan Scorpius of Legio Policiates has lost its shields entirely owing to the indiscriminate bombardments. This could have had a game-changing effect for the coming turns, as the battle gets more and more violent for both sides. In this phase, Legio Policiates have priority. Go on to stratagems and orders now.
Turn 5 stratagems phase for Legio Noctilus. Starting with Typhoon, who took a point of damage to his head due to the chemical bombardments, wasn't great, issued an emergency repair order and passed. Immediately doing a repair roll, unfortunately not getting enough to reignite the Void Shields, instead vented some plasma to put him back in the green. The other Reaver Titan, Scourge, issued a full stride order, signalling its intention to try and push into the enemy deployment zone. Really need to start playing the objective now that the board is mostly clear of knights. However, we do have the enemy Reavers with chain fists, threatening close, so this might be a foolish decision, but hopefully not. Every other unit, the Warhound and the Warlord, have not chosen to issue orders to keep ourselves flexible for the coming turns. We're in the game now, so we really need to start scoring some points.
Turn 5, orders phase for Legio Policiates. Having failed a single charge order with the lone knight that still remains, Legio Policiates are not able to take any more orders, and as such will move into the movement phase in the end phase of this game. Turn 5 movement phase, first activation to Legio Policiates. The last remaining knight on the field has elected to move into combat with the Reaver Titan. Hopefully it will do some damage before it will be absolutely obliterated by its larger cousin.
Turn 5, movement, Nigilo Noctilus first activation. The Warhound has continued its journey through the Policiates deployment zone, just trying to stay out of arc for most things, or at least trying not to be an obvious target. It's going to push further later in the turn and just try and keep its head down, hopefully score some points later on.
Next activation for Legio Policiates, the Reaver Titan Ballistae Magni manoeuvres in quite a complicated way in order to get its volcano cannons hopefully in the rear of that Warhound Titan threatening Policiates' rearguard.
Next activation for Legio Noctilus, the Warlord Titan Black Reaper rotates itself slightly around and advances slowly towards the enemy lines, hopefully having a shot on a couple of enemy Reavers, giving itself some choices.
Final activation for Legio Policiates, the Reaver Titan Scorpius, having taken substantial damage in the form of a devastating hit to its legs from the acid rain, turns to face the Reaver Titan, who is about to steal a march into the rearguard of the Loyalist Titan Legio.
Next activation for Legio Noctilus, the Reaver Titan Scourge does as the enemy predicts, pushes reactor for 1 point of heat, but marches 9 inches up the board, hopefully out of arc of the enemy's weapons, and bringing it closer to the key deployment zone to score some points. Final activation in the movement phase for Legio Noctilus. The Princeps Sonuris in Typhoon has chosen to move rather than fire this turn after having emergency repaired. He's sidestep, pushes reactor, not getting any heat, which is really nice, and then move forward to hide behind the chemical bombardment to try and make sure he doesn't get shot out this turn. Hopefully just pressuring both the Knight and the enemy Reavers next turn with his long-range weaponry.
Turn 5, damage control phase. For Legio Policiates, the Reaver Titan Ballistae Magni manages to restore its reactor by a couple of points, hoping to exploit some openings with its volcano cannon. Additionally, the Reaver Titan Scorpius manages to restore its shields, which is crucial in the end phase of the game, which means it could survive as they were previously destroyed. It also repaired its Reaver Chain Fist as well, which is very useful as engines are moving on the rear lines very quickly.
Damage control phase, turn 5 for Legio Noctilus, quite an eventful one. Starting with the Reaver Titan Scourge, it managed to vent plasma back into the green, nothing really to report there. Next, frustratingly, with the Reaver Titan Typhoon, its voids are still collapsed, so it needed a single 6, and for the second turn in a row, didn't manage to get one. It did, however, manage to vent a little bit of plasma and repair its damaged volcano cannon. Next, on to the Warlord from Legio Mortis. It managed to repair the critical damage to its legs and vent a little bit of plasma. Its shields were still a little bit low, unfortunately. Finally, onto the Warhound, crucially in the enemy deployment zone. Its reactor was in the orange, so was overloaded. I rolled exactly what it needed not to roll, which was a void shield failure, power collapse. So the void shields collapsed, leaving it completely exposed to the very close by enemy Reaver Titan with the volcano cannons in its rear, which was really not great. However, it then made up for it by rolling 3 dice thanks to the Elite Magos trait for the custom Legio. It rolled 2 6s and a 5, managing to both repair its previous critical damage and regain a point of shield and take its reactor out of the orange. So it redeemed itself. Hopefully it'll stay alive for the next turn.
Turn 5, combat phase, activation to Legio Policiates. The Reaver Titan Ballistae Magni opens fire with its volcano cannon at the now shielded Warhound Titan, pushing it and taking 2 points of heat. Its reactor goes dangerously close. However, its shot then misses, scattering into the distance, while the second volcano cannon opens up, drawing another point of heat, but finally collapsing the Warhound shields. However, it's shieldless, but nothing else can shoot it this turn.
First combat activation for Legio Noctilus, turn 5. The Reaver Titan Scourge activates its full stride order, pushing its reactor to gain extra movement. Takes a point of heat, but it brings it into, firstly into the enemy deployment zone almost. Secondly, it brings it quite far away from the enemy Reaver Titan with the Chain Fist that looks quite worrying. Hopefully it's in a strong position to threaten the enemy Reaver. We'll see if it can survive.
Next activation for Legio Policiates. The last remaining knight opens fire into the side arc of the unshielded Reaver with its Avenger Gatling cannon. Rolling a whopping 8 dice to a targeted hit to the body, it manages to do a single point of direct damage to the body, which is an admirable effort for such a small weapon.
Final activation for Legio Noctilus in the combat phase. The Mortis Warlord, Dark Reaper, targets the enemy Reaver in the deployment zone, unleashes all its Apocalypse Missile Launcher shots. We get 9 hits, really luckily, and that was enough to crash its shields. So the enemy Reaver is now voidless.
Final activation for Legio Policiates. Firing of its Carapace Vulcan Megabolter through the just about visible Reaver Titan, manages to hit 4 times, thanks to the rapid trait of the Vulcan Megabolter. However, only strips a single shield from the Reaver Titan, which isn't ideal, but still better than nothing.
Turn 5 end phase for both Legios. No ongoing effects as there are no criticals, so nothing to resolve. It's been a bit of a manoeuvre turn again after the bloody turn of turn 4. We now have Legio Noctilus pushing into the enemy deployment zone, but they do have their backs to the enemies. They're not in a great position to fight, but they are in a good position to score, so who knows if they'll actually survive to score. The other 2 units are right towards the back of the board, unable to do too much other than some long-range shots. Policiates are still in the game. They have Reavers with Chain Fists, they have Volcano Cannons, and a lone knight still left from the Lance. So as we go into turn 6, which will be the last turn of the game, it is all to play for in every sense of the word.
Turn 6, Orders phase, priority to Legio Policiates. The Reaver Titan Scorpius enacts a charge order successfully, hopefully being able to maneuver itself into the rear of the approaching Noctilus engine. Additionally, the Reaver Titan Ballistae Magni successfully enacts a first fire, hopefully be able to do some damage on the shieldless Warhound in front of it. Finally, the last remaining knight failed a charge order. However, it's still in range to threaten the shieldless Princeps Sonorus Reaver Titan.
Legio Noctilus turn 6 strategy and orders phase. We passed 1 order on the Warhound Titan, which was an emergency repair in a desperate attempt to reignite its void shields for against the oncoming storm of volcanic fire from the Reaver. Unfortunately, it was unsuccessful. It did, however, manage to vent a point of plasma, but that is all it was able to do. We've left all the other orders, all the other Titans free of orders to give ourselves some flexibility. In the stratagems phase, called in another strafing run. It hit both the remaining Reavers. It did no damage to the Reaver with volcanic cannons. It did, however, hit the Reaver with Chain Fist and Melter Cannon. It hit it in the Melter Cannon and managed to disable the Melter Cannon for this turn, which isn't too bad for a stratagem.
In the stratagem phase, the weather effects continued alongside the traitor and loyalist bombardments, all of which are affecting both of our engines indiscriminately. For example, the engine Scorpius lost its shields entirely due to a danger close bombardment, and the Princeps Sonorus of Legio Noctilus takes damage to the leg due to a close range bombardment as well. First activation for Legio Policiates in the movement phase. Owing to its first fire order, the Reaver Titan Ballistae Magni opens fire with its Volcano Cannon into the rear of the Warhound Titan, managing to do 3 crits to the body of the lumbering, shieldless engine. Pretty successful, but it did take a point of heat of the reactor in return.
Turn 6, first activation in the movement phase for Legio Noctilus. The Warhound, which almost died, took a Volcano Cannon to the rear, managed to push itself forward, get out the way and hide behind this line of sight blocking terrain. Hopefully it's safe for the rest of the turn. It is very close to death, however, but it's managed to escape.
Next activation for Legio Policiates. The last remaining Knight of House Peltasti moves to the rear of the Reaver Titan to threaten it with its tiny Avenger Gatling cannon. Maybe it'll do some damage, but the Reaver Titan will inevitably move away at some speed from the little knight.
Next activation for Legio Noctilus in the movement phase. The Warlord Titan Black Reaper moves through the smoke of the chemical bombardment to just free up its weapons, potentially be in range to make some shots later in the turn.
Next activation for Legio Policiates. The Reaver Titan Scorpius under the charge order advances into the rear of the Noctilus Reaver. However, it is just out of range to strike with its combat weapon. which is unfortunate, but it still has ranged weapons it can use on the engine as it approaches the rearguard. Not quite a loss, but rather have the advantage of the charge order.
Final activations for Legio Noctilus in the movement phase of turn 6. The Reaver Titan Typhoon just pushed forward 6 inches to try and get its weapons into range and escape from the knight that is chasing it doggedly. The Reaver Titan Scourge, however, pushed forward again, getting away from the rather scary Reaver Titan with the Chain Fist, bringing itself right into the enemy deployment zone and hopefully bringing itself into arc and the side of the enemy Reaver Titan with the volcano cannons, hopefully getting some shots on it within its void shields.
Damage control phase for Legio Policiates in turn 6. The Reaver Titan Scorpius suffers a plasma reactor leak and takes a single strength 9 hit to the body, which results in a devastating hit, which is pretty nasty and pretty brutal in the last turn of the game. Additionally, the Reaver Titan Ballistae Magnus, which also had a plasma reactor, suffered 3 hits to the body, however, rolled 3 ones and took no damage, and then managed to vent some plasma in the ensuing phase. Additionally, with its repair roll, Scorpius managed to repair its once-defunct melter cannon.
Damage control phase for Legio Noctilus, turn 6. The Warlord vented some plasma and regained 3 shields, which is pretty decent. The Princeps Signoris in Typhoon managed to finally reignite its void shields and regain 3 shields and vent 1 point of plasma, which is potentially nice, but not that great in the last turn of the game. The Reaver Titan Scourge managed to just vent 1 point of plasma, which was, I suppose, needed, but not particularly great. Finally, the Warhound Titan that has suffered so much critical damage rolled abysmally, and all it managed to do was vent 1 point of plasma. It's still critically damaged, however, still alive for the moment.
Combat phase activation for Legio Policiates. The Reaver Titan Scorpius opens fire with its Carapace Vulcan Megabolter, managing to hit 5 times. However, the lucky push of the reactor that resulted in no heat meant that the Reaver Titan was able to save all of those hits. It then opened fire with a melter cannon and missed completely, scattering into the distance.
Combat activation for Legio Noctilus in turn 6. The Princeps Signoris targets the enemy Reaver Titan with 1 shield left with its Carapace-mounted laser destructor. It uses the draining trait to try and make the enemy fail their saves. It, however, rolls an Awakened Machine Spirit, and perhaps the machine, feeling it was being left behind, seeing its comrades up front, it fails on a 1 and rolls the Impetuous trait, pushing itself d6 forwards. In this case, it walks 4 inches forwards and then ends the activation.
The last Knight of House Peltasti has forgone its activation, as its small gun cannot penetrate the shields of the Reaver Titan of the Princeps Signoris.
Next activation for Legio Noctilus, perhaps considering it would be slight overkill, the Warlord, however, targeted its 10 Apocalypse missile shots at the enemy Reaver with a single shield left. It did, however, roll every single one other than 1 as a save. Its reactor was pushed, gaining 2 points of heat and putting it into the red. It re-rolled the final failed save and unfortunately came up as a 2, so it did lose its final shield, but only by 1 shot. That Reaver is now in the red.
Owing to its reactor being pushed into the red in the last shooting phase by Noctilus, the Reaver Titan Ballistae Magni forgoes firing both its volcano cannons into the fully shielded and operational Warlord Titan opposite it. Final activation for Legio Policiates in the combat phase.
Legio Noctilus last activation in turn 6 in the combat phase. The Reaver Titan Scourge takes aim at the enemy Reaver Titan right in front of it, which is now voidless. Opens up with its Apocalypse Missile Launcher, scoring some hits to the chest. It then places targeted shots on the body with its lasers and with the Gatling Blaster. Unfortunately, a roll of bad luck led to only a couple of points of direct damage, not enough to even put it into a critical.
End phase for turn 6 and the final turn of the game. The Warhound Titan has suffered a severe critical reactor leak, and its reactor is then pushed into the orange in the end phase of the game. This has been an exceptionally bloody and difficult game for both loyalists and traitors, so we're going to total up the victory points and get back to you with the winner. So that was an exceptionally difficult and very, very great game, actually.
Wow. Yeah.
So Very difficult. I thought at one point I'd had it, and then swung back very quickly, and I was on the back foot very quickly.
I don't know, that was a seesaw of a game. That
Yes,
was
yeah,
really
yeah.
up and down. I could not call it right to the end. Yeah.
Even it took some calculating to work it out at the end
Yeah,
as well.
had to sit down with our maths books.
Calculators at the hand and everything.
Yeah.
But no, it was very enjoyable.
Yep.
There was a lot of new stuff as well. Never seen a light lance on the channel before.
No,
quite enjoyable.
it was great. It was really good. So from my point of view, the game was really interesting. It was a really tough mission, I found.
Yes.
I was really worried because the first 2 or 3 turns, because that wave of knights came towards me, I just had to sit there in my deployment zone almost trying to blast them away, because I knew if those blocks of 4 hit me, that many melee attacks, those even the warlord would be goodbye.
Yeah.
So I had to spend a long time, half the game, just trying to clear your chaff, as it were. And then could finally push forward, but sort of turn 3 or 4, I was kind of biting my nails because I was thinking I've got to get across the board and I'm still in my deployment zone. So it was a really tough mission from my point of view, but really, really fun. Lots of big swing moments.
So the luxury of having those knights is that they weren't a scoring unit, so I could use them as chaff. However, I just couldn't get the damage down.
Yes.
I may have played too cautiously, but at the same time, your repair rolls...
They came straight from my Titans. I don't think that was cautious.
Its repair rolls were very fantastic. There were a number of criticals that you repaired at the nick of time. That could have given me some...
I think both our dice rolls were up and down. We both literally, like, I had rolls where I got 4 1s on really critical to hit rolls, and you got repair rolls where absolutely nothing got repaired. And both of us, it was just up and down all over throughout the whole game.
It was a very, very tense, very dramatic game. We hope you enjoyed watching it. However, let's go to the meat of it and what the scores were.
Yes.
So, very close. Even though the points were a bit uneven, 2,000 versus 745.
Yep.
Still, Traitors just edged over with a victory.
Just a little bit.
22 to you, and then 19 to the Loyalists.
Yes, 22-19.
Very close.
First Traitor victory on the channel.
Yeah.
Finally, so not on the channel, in the campaign. So 2-1 overall in the campaign. So next game will be for a draw, potentially.
If
the Traitors can win again, then it's a draw. The great soap opera of the Horus Heresy continues on. It's a stalemate. Everybody loses.
Yeah, there might be a wider comment about this. Anyway, we've brought back units that we like.
Yep.
So, what about your unit, the Warhound?
So I just brought back the little Warhound. He didn't do that much in terms of shooting. I think he might have shot a couple of times, once or twice. He might have taken some shields down. I think his unit, him and his buddy in his squadron, killed some knights early on in the game. But basically, he got some pretty amazing repair rolls towards the end of the game. There was a point where he got shot in the back, and he was on the 3rd crit of the body.
Yeah.
And his repair rolls were pretty amazing. He managed to just escape, and obviously he awarded you 6 points because he was structurally compromised. But if he was dead, he would have, you would have got 6 points no matter what. But if he's dead, I wouldn't have got 6 points, and that would have swung it completely.
Yeah,
it would have
absolutely.
been, 18-19 in that case.
And and it was harder for me to target a squadron, as you can share shields.
Yeah.
So taking them down is quite difficult. So Warhounds have a real power in AT.
Yeah, I really like playing Warhounds. They're just nippy and zippy.
Yes.
And I like
the
that.
maneuverability
that's sort of
it's immensely frustrating.
Yeah. So, and your unit is?
I've brought back a Knight Banner. The one with Avenger Gatling Cannon specifically, because Strength 3 means nothing to a Titan unless there's 4 of them doing a ridiculous amount of shots in the side arc of a Titan. In that case, they get dangerous quickly. Yes. And I think that's the thing about Knights in AT. Unlike 30k and 40k in it as well, Knights are quite a dominating, towering thing. Yeah. But in AT, they're a completely different thing. They're more like infantry. They swarm, they nip. Yeah. And if you're not paying attention to them, they're in your rear arc with suddenly a strength 8 Avenger Gatling Cannon, which can get very dangerous.
Absolutely.
So they make any Warlord Princeps sweat, to be honest.
Well, I mean, in the game, I had to take them seriously. I couldn't... There were a few times in the middle of the game where they'd been thinned out a bit, and I was sort of thinking, there's only 2 or 3 left. I could try and ignore them and push forward, start targeting your Titans, but as soon as they start getting in your rear arc and melee weapons and getting charge orders off, it's over. So you couldn't really ignore them. I really enjoyed playing against a Lance, though.
Yeah. So we've never seen that on the channel, and I've not really seen it much in the AT community anyway.
No.
So it's a really fun, really interesting thing that can be a challenge because you're bringing tiny models against giant engines with weapons that can obliterate you in a shot.
Yeah.
However, it makes you play a bit differently and play a whole different game to them, which is really interesting. And there's a lot of new rules in there as well.
Yeah.
Command squads that we didn't see in this game, and banners, which
might be making an appearance.
Which might
later.
be making an appearance. Yeah, knights with tiny banners is a fantastic
Yeah.
idea, and I think that will be appearing in our next game.
I hope so.
When we go up to an even larger game with even higher stakes.
Yes, so it will be the ultimate battle
Yeah.
for Rhodax in the fortress.
Yeah.
On top of the artifact, which will be revealed next game.
Yes. Yeah. 3,000 points,
3,000
larger
points.
engines, larger battles, larger stakes, to put a cornier spin on things.
Yes.
We hope you've enjoyed the first 3 games going forward. And we're looking forward to loads more Adeptus Titanicus going into the new year.
Yes.
Loads lined up for you. And as well, if you're interested in 30k and the wider community, head over to the channel, subscribe, and you can see some fantastic boards in the Age of Darkness. Thank you for watching.
You can follow us as well.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Social media. You can follow us. Names below if...
There and there. Yep.
Yep. So be sure to do so. Be sure to watch us. Thank you and goodbye.